The police chief locked himself in a prison cell, bolted the door from the inside, threw away the key, and then turned to face the apocalyptic scene displayed on the screen. In the corner, a corpse lay motionless, his wife. Despite his officer's pleas, the chief proceeded to utter the words that would condemn him forever.
I want to go out.
The reason the sheriff did this all traces back to 2 years ago, when everyone lived in the massive, 144-story underground building known as the silo. Outside the silo was a world filled with toxic gas. Though a perfect ecological balance had formed within the building, space was limited. To fall in love, people had to get approval from the higher-ups, and reproduction was controlled through a lottery system. One day, Sheriff Becker and his wife, Ellie, were thrilled to discover that they had been granted approval to reproduce and could have their own child. This had been their dream for years. As soon as they received the news, they rushed to the hospital, where the doctor removed the birth control device from Ellie. According to the law, they had 1 year to conceive their child. If they failed to do so within that time, Ellie would have the device reimplanted and would be forbidden from having children. A month flew by in the blink of an eye. One day, Ellie's supervisor from the IT department approached her at work. It turned out that Ellie had posted a paper on the forum about recovering deleted files without getting approval from her supervisor. Though Ellie thought it was a minor issue, her supervisor followed protocol and had the article removed. Several months later, Ellie still showed no signs of pregnancy. One day, an elderly woman suddenly stopped Ellie on her way to work and mysteriously told her that she knew the reason Ellie hadn't become pregnant. After taking Ellie to her home, the woman turned on the faucet to block any potential eavesdropping from the Department of Justice. She then revealed that the higher-ups would never allow a curious woman like Ellie, who questioned the outside world, to become pregnant.
Do you really think you're the kind of person they want having children?
However, when Sheriff Becker heard this from his wife, he reassured her. He told her that her birth control device had been removed and that, like others who had been approved, they too had the same opportunity to have a child. He explained that the elderly woman had always had mental issues, so her words were baseless. Ellie was ultimately convinced by her husband's comforting words. A few days later, Ellie received an unexpected repair request. When she entered the computer repair shop located on the lower level of the silo, the owner, George, pulled out the paper she had once posted on the forum about restoring deleted files. It turned out that George had accidentally come into possession of an old world hard drive. Strangely, it appeared empty, but when George followed the method Ellie had described in her paper, he found that most of the memory had already been used. This suggested that the data had been hidden using a special method, which was why George sought Ellie's help. After Ellie successfully cracked the contents of the hard drive, she was horrified and quickly removed her glasses. The hard drive contained blueprints of the silo's structure. Possessing such historical artifacts was a serious crime, and before leaving the shop, she warned George to destroy the hard drive. However, her inability to conceive caused Ellie to recall the words of the old woman. So, one evening after work, she returned to the repair shop and took another look at the hard drive's contents. In addition to the blueprints, she also saw images of the world outside the silo, blue skies, white clouds, and flying birds, which completely shattered her understanding of reality. That evening, when Ellie returned home, only 7 hours remained on her and her husband Becker's pregnancy permit. They had agreed to go to the hospital the next morning for one final checkup, but the following day, Sheriff Becker waited in vain for his wife. When Becker felt something was wrong and rushed home, his pale-faced wife told him that the higher-ups would never allow them to have children because she was not the kind of person they approved for childbirth. She then extended her hand, showing him the birth control device she had just removed from her body. Seeing his wife's bloody hand and the bloodstained knife, Becker panicked and immediately ran to the hospital for help. Before they could return to the sheriff's residence, Ellie had already made her way to the silo's cafeteria, trying to expose the higher-ups' deception to the residents. She told them that the world outside was filled with green trees and blue skies, and everything they saw on the screens was just a false illusion created by the higher-ups to keep them trapped. By the time Becker arrived, Ellie had already said the irreversible words.
I want to go out!
Ellie slowly extended her hands, and Becker could only watch helplessly as his men cuffed his wife. It turned out that there was a rule in the silo that couldn't be violated. Any verbal request to leave the silo would be granted, and it was irrevocable. The higher-ups required rulebreakers to clean the ground-based observation equipment after leaving, but they couldn't force anyone to do so, as once someone left the silo, they were no longer under the jurisdiction of the law. Before leaving the silo, Ellie apologized to her husband for her actions. She knew that the doctor would say the capsule inside her body wasn't a birth control device, but rather a different kind of infection prevention device. However, none of that mattered now. She told her husband that she wouldn't die outside the silo. The higher-ups had altered what they saw on the screen, and what they saw wasn't the true situation outside. Though Ellie didn't know why the higher-ups had trapped them here, she told her husband that if the outside world truly was a wasteland, she wouldn't clean the equipment. Instead, she'd wave goodbye to the cameras, having made the biggest mistake of her life. But if the outside world was, as she believed, a lush and beautiful place, she would use the wool to clean the observation equipment, then cross the hill to uncover the truth. After that, she'd return and take Becker with her to leave. When the moment came, Ellie put on the protective suit prepared for her and, under her husband's watchful eyes, slowly walked toward the gate leading to the outside world. It wasn't long before the residents in the cafeteria saw a gap open in the ground on the screen, and soon after, Ellie stepped through it. To Becker's surprise, his wife walked right up to the camera and used the wool to clean the observation equipment, confirming that her judgment was correct. But before Ellie could climb the nearby hill, she began to lose strength, and the screen showed her collapsing under a dead tree, her breath fading away. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Sheriff Becker received a report from his subordinates. A man named George had fallen to his death the previous night. No signs of foul play were found at the scene, but a lower-level engineer believed George had been murdered. When they found the engineer, named Juliet, she was repairing the generator that powered the entire silo. Once she finished her work, Sheriff Becker took her to the crime scene and examined George's injuries. However, they found no signs of murder. Still, Juliet insisted that George couldn't have committed suicide. She told Becker that, on the day of his death, George had come to see her and they had arranged to meet that night in her room. When Juliet returned home after work, she didn't find George in her room, but she did find something he had left for her. It contained an artifact from the old world and a note that read, *, do you remember where you last saw her? *. Juliet then took Becker to the lowest level of the silo. She explained that the place they were going to see was far more illegal than any historical artifact. At the end of the hallway, Juliet moved a no-entry warning sign, revealing a hidden hole behind it. They crawled down a makeshift ladder through the opening and continued downward until they reached the bottom. There, Juliet activated the power and turned on the lights, revealing the wreckage of a massive excavation machine. Juliet speculated that this was the machine used by the builders to construct the silo, and that all valuable parts had long since been dismantled. They made their way down a set of stairs to Juliet's destination, which was a secret hideout that George had set up. It was here that Juliet first saw the artifact from the old world. However, the box that had previously contained the item also held a bundle of nylon rope, which was now missing. Later, Juliet found traces of the missing nylon rope at the spot where the box had been stored. Following the trail, they reached the end of a steel bar, where the other end of the rope was tied to a package. Inside the package was the hard drive that George had previously asked Ellie to help crack. After Becker took the hard drive, he stopped contacting Juliet. Not long after, he locked himself inside a cell and uttered the words that started this chain of events. Once the preparations were made, Becker became the first sheriff in silo history to be sent for cleaning. Following the same path his wife had walked, Becker made his way to the surface, and what he saw before him was exactly as Ellie had described. The silo residents watched as Becker slowly walked to the observation room and used the wool to clean the dirt off the equipment. But just as he was about to leave the area, the same symptoms that had appeared in everyone else began to affect Becker. Unlike the others, however, Becker chose to remove his helmet. Sadly, this action only provided temporary relief. When he finally made it to his wife's side, he collapsed, breathless. Witnessing this, Juliet once again descended to the lowest level of the silo, to the secret hideout George had built. Standing in front of the bed, she suddenly remembered a conversation she had with George. He had once told her that he discovered a secret passage hidden beneath the bottom of the silo's blueprint, and that his purpose for living here was to find that passage. With that memory, Juliet grabbed the rope George had prepared and, after throwing the other end down, she began climbing toward the bottom of the silo. However, when she reached the end of the rope, she found herself looking down into an unknown depth of water.